Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Patrick Dennis, CEO of ExtraHop, to discuss implementing generative AI solutions safely and the challenges businesses might face entering the generative AI space as it becomes oversaturated. Dennis, Patrick, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks for taking a couple minutes, Jill. It's nice to be here.
You got it. Tell us more about your company, ExtraHop.
Well, ExtraHop is a leading global network security company. We focus on detection and response. Our Reveal X platform gives people 360-degree visibility into their networks so that they can know more about what's going on in the network, they can see more, and they can stop more cyber attacks.
With generative AI at the top of business leaders' minds, how can companies implement generative AI solutions safely?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So over the last few months, I've spent time with our largest customers. Think of those as the largest banks, insurance companies, telecommunication firms. And there's this real tension. There's an incredible opportunity to increase value for these companies by using these tools. And at the same time, there's actually a really large risk. And so people have to think about how do you put information into these tools because you can't get it back once it's put in. And so at the most macro level, what companies are thinking about is AI as a service offers me a great productivity enhancement, maybe gives me a competitive edge, but I need to determine if my employees are using it appropriately, and if there's good use or there's misuse. And so the real core to this is, can you start with visibility? Do you know what your employees are doing? We need the new tech to make big advancements in society, but we also have to take some precautions.
As companies like Apple start to restrict employee use of the technology, where can business leverage the tools to their advantage? And Patrick, are these restrictions necessary or premature?
It's really interesting. I think I understand where Apple was coming from. They have a huge amount of intellectual property. It's the core of what they do. And so their first instinct was to block the use of the tools because they knew they couldn't get the information back if it was ever put into one. And so I'm sympathetic to Apple's kind of initial move to block the use of the technology. I don't think that's where they're going to land in the long run. Like everyone else, they're going to realize that there are productivity enhancements and big unlocks that can happen for these companies if they're making smart and sophisticated use of these technologies. So I think Apple's first instinct was block, but over time, I think what you're going to see is all companies migrate to a policy-based application of these technologies. Then they're going to look to companies like ours to help them understand whether or not people are using the technology within the policy that they've written.
ChatGPT recently launched an iOS app as well for the iPhone. Does the existence of the app and having it more readily available to more people, does that pose additional risk? And if so, how?
Yeah, really good question. So think about iOS devices, right? We all have a phone, we all have a tablet of some sort, and certainly there's more information on those devices, including in many cases the phones that have access to our corporate assets. And so the first thing that we need to understand is adding that iOS capability vastly increased the surface area of where somebody can use a technology like generative AI. And I think it's really the first signal of the fact that this is going to be a distributed technology over time. Jill, you might like this. There's a website called Hugging Face, pretty funny name, but it inventories all the large language models that are going into and being completed by, like, frankly, the open source community. So take iOS, it's just the first signal that we're going to move to a much more distributed set of these capabilities over time.
Tell us about the new capability ExtraHop just released that helps detect when sensitive data is leaked to generative AI tools. Why is this type of functionality necessary?
Well, this type of functionality is really important because go back to the policy point. I think what most companies will do is they're going to establish a policy first. They're going to say these sets of employees can use generative AI technology and these sets of employees can't, or these are safe generative AI technologies to use and these ones are not safe. Well, the minute you establish a policy, you need some way to monitor the use. And so the capability that ExtraHop released allows companies to see two things: the users of these technologies and how much use is taking place of these technologies. So it really is the first step to being able to help people understand if people are complying with a policy or if there's perhaps misuse. It allows for attribution of the users and allows for a sense of how much information is moving. By the way, the thing I'm most excited about is we thought about this problem and we actually went back into the engineering team and we got this first capability released in about 2 weeks. So I think the right thing to say is, Jill, like, This is not the end of the story here. This is the beginning for ExtraHop. And I think it's a beginning for companies like ExtraHop and helping companies take safe use of these technologies and taking advantage of them.
What challenges might businesses face entering the generative AI space as it becomes more oversaturated?
Go back to that Hugging Face thing that I mentioned. I mean, it's scaling so widely right now. Most of us kind of just heard about Chat GPT or maybe Google Bard, right? But in reality, this is getting to be a much, much bigger set of technologies at a really, really breakneck pace. And so I think what we're going to see is we're going to see it scale down to local devices, like you mentioned, the iOS devices, laptops, so on and so forth. That's going to cause rapid distribution of these technologies. And it's much harder to manage them when they do get that distributed. So I think as we see that saturation increase, yes, we're going to see an improvement in the use cases and we're going to see new industries born even. But we're also going to have the challenges that I'm describing today, but at a much broader scale.
How can companies differentiate themselves from the larger competitor landscape, and what gaps might this technology fill? I mean, if we think about the cyberspace, I think there's over 3,500 US companies with just that space alone. So you're always thinking about how you differentiate yourself. What about with this newer technology?
Well, so broadly speaking, there's some categories, and I think this has been discussed very broadly, that become really obvious places to use these capabilities. So for instance, I just booked a trip recently. I used ChatGPT to plan a trip for my wife and I to Cape Cod. It did a really, really great job of that. And by the way, I make use of some of these technologies every day just so I can get a sense of what they can do. So can I see service and support use cases for these technologies? Sure, I can. Those things are very, very obvious. I think as you kind of move past the more obvious things, the bigger question is, if there was a step function change in productivity in pharmaceuticals, what would that look like? If there was a step function change in technology companies, what if my engineering department was 10 times more productive? Sometimes it's hard to imagine and really contemplate what could come from this, but the biggest and best companies in the future will find a way to make use of this technology. That's part one. And then part two, very simply, we talk about how these models are really big. ChatGPT is really big. There's also going to be space for these models that are really small and focused on niche information. And you might see that deployed in cybersecurity so that we can do a better job of detecting and responding to the things that we see every day in our industry. And so I think you're going to see two big bifurcations. Industries where these large language models apply directly right now, things like the travel use case. And then you're going to see some very specialized deployments of these technologies in tech companies like mine.
All right, Patrick, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.